to the main Abhidhamma teachers in the country. Because I think that, Bhikkhu Bodhi has these same examples I've heard a bunch of times. And, it's good to freshen up your thinking to actually
Yeah.
give examples. This is very helpful. Yeah, well, maybe we should get started. And I don't know the Jaws music for like Back in the Water, but I did want to say, I'm really sorry if it was kind of overwhelming. Part of it is unavoidable because we are serious students, and I think it's so complicated, and there's an entry phenomenon that happens where you go, what? And this is where a lot of people go, I hate the Abhidhamma, it's bad study, but I'm hoping as we, if you can help me, if things if you just feel like your head is starting to swim, flag me down. I'm totally fine backing up, stopping, trying to be less immersed. We can come up for air, and it is super complicated, but this is because consciousness is so super complicated and our experiences are unbelievable. So I appreciate you all hanging in and coming back. I felt really bad. Like I really wanted to provide you with a lot, but not to overwhelm you. And that line is kind of fine. So I'm going to tell you a story about my first, case of the bends with the Abhidhamma. The way I got into it, I mean, I'm from a Soto Zen background, and my Roshi or teacher is from that original group from the San Francisco Zen Center who studied with Shunryo Suzuki and Dainin Katagiri, if you know those names. That famous book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind, was written by Shunryo Suzuki. Wonderful book for, any Buddhist or not Buddhist. And because, they were trained by monks who are from Asia, they had very good original Buddhism appreciation and training. So my teacher had to take 3 or 4 year course on the Abhidhamma, and she hated it. And so then at some point she was getting older, and she said, I'm going to divide up like areas of my teachings to different students and ask them to carry it forward. And so I'm wondering if you would like to carry forward the teachings on the Abhidhamma. Now, we were saying Abhidharma, but Abhidhamma. And I was like, sure, yeah, that's really cool. And I had no idea what it was at all. But I went with it. And she had reason, for it wasn't random, but I just rolled with it. The first book I read was Abhidhamma Studies by Nyona Panika Thera. It has a whole chapter on one of the 121 types, a whole chapter, just like, so it was, pretty mind boggling. And then she kind of let me run. So I ordered a book called The Buddhist Philosophy of Relations. And I thought, oh, that'd be cool. Talk about like how people interact. No, it is Ledi Sayadaw's summary of the Patana. Ledi Sayadaw, who Bhante mentioned, the Burmese monk, who is a very big Abhidhamma specialist. And it was his summary of the Patana, the relations between all the variables in the Abhidhamma. So how every single one of them can relate in 24 ways to every single other one of them. And I knew none of the variables, but I will show you this book. Teeny little book. It's so old fashioned that where the O's are printed, a lot of them fell out, the center of the O. It's a great old book. And in Doka-san, which is the Zen term for like your private interview with your teacher, we met weekly, 2.5 years, this book. So I was so overwhelmed. I was reading footnotes on footnotes and just going, what, for years. It was really, and so I do remember the feeling, there's just, no matter where you enter, there's this immersion period where you're like, I can't understand this without understanding this, without understanding this. And it's just bing and bongs all over, and it just feels very overwhelming. I remember this one moment when a click happened. And in that book, there was a metaphor for the mind and the object. And the metaphor was there's a hook on the wall and you put a kitchen pot on the hook. And I was like, oh yeah, there's my mind and there's the object I'm hooking on my mind. And then I read it again. I'm like, I have this backwards. The object was the hook. The mind was the pot. And all of a sudden I went, it was just like this great reorientation feeling. So instead of just saying like, there's a song stuck in my head, I'm saying my head is stuck on a song, because that song is out there. That song's been out there since the person who created the song made the song. But at that moment, I'm hooking my mind, in metaphor talk, to this object. So I just remember that moment was when I started getting a feel for just how this study could affect me. Because it was like, it was a jarring moment. And then those moments start to accumulate. And then the sense of it no longer feels like bits and pieces, but it feels like a big thing where you are missing bits and pieces, but it feels like it has a hold. So I'm just saying that to say, I'm really sorry if it was overwhelming this morning or boring or anything like that. And also that I'm taking you back in. Okay, that was the worst of it, the sense sphere, because as I said, the sense sphere is where we are operating with our complexity. And as humans, we muck up the chitas so much, and we have all these explanations for how we do that. So it won't be so hard to fill out the rest of the 121, but I feel like we should. You guys are okay? Hanging in? I really appreciate you. I really do. I forget that, everybody, I know you're all at different levels, and some of you have studied this for years, and some of you maybe are hearing some of these terms for the first time. But okay, we're gonna go back. We are now, I'm gonna get us reoriented, and myself also. We're out of the sense sphere. Okay. Let's just look here. Okay. Okay, so we're still in the mundane sphere. These are still worldly, in the broadest sense, worldly chitas, but the fine material sphere chitas and the immaterial sphere chitas are coming up. And these are trained levels of concentration. These aren't the things, I think they maybe can spontaneously happen, as Bhante was saying, but they are really trained levels. So at this point, the sense that we all have that, our meditation is clarifying, slowing down, simplifying experience. This is just taking that further. So the fine material sphere chitas relate to the jhana levels. Now, Narada Thera describes jhana as simply concentration on an object. But there are very, very specific trainings, and Bhante is going to talk about this more in later classes, but very specific trainings. The book that has the most information about this is the Visuddhimagga. That's the meditation implications of every piece of Abhidhamma information. Usually they did start with some kind of material object like a kasina, which was a circle. And, in the Visuddhimagga, they talk about how to make your kasina. You want it to be the color of the Ganges at dawn. So use the mud from here, not from here. And when your kasina is drying, don't put it where the other monks walk. It's a very funny concrete book in some places. But anyways, you make the kasina, you concentrate on an object, and then you concentrate enough that you can remove the object and still concentrate on it, still hold to it. That's called a learning sign. It's a visualized replica of the object. It's very interesting because in brain research, if you look at something and you imagine looking at something, most of the same brain activity happens. So this is kind of playing with that same thing. You look at it for a while, then you remove it and you can imagine it. You have created you've moved the object basically from the external senses to the internal. And then you have a counterpart sign, which is a kind of purified, magnified breaking out of the object. It's another view. It's an extreme concentration where you kind of almost perfect the object. And then you move into the immaterial sphere concentrations. There are 5 jhana factors, and I don't know if I have this written down anywhere. Oh yeah, I have something just to show you what these are. We in the fine material. Okay, here we are with the jhana factors. The main thing about the jhana factors is that they drop out as you go up the jhana levels. Now in the suttas, there's 4 jhanas, they're collapsed and there's 4 of them, but the Abhidhamma has these 5 jhana levels. And so it tells you together with, and so in the first jhana level, you have all the 5 factors, then you drop out the first, then you drop out the second. So these jhana factors are mental factors that go with the citta. And as you concentrate more and more on the object, your citta becomes simpler and simpler. You need less reinforcements, kind of. It's a very interesting concept. So the jhana factors, the first one is where it says in application, that's vitakka. It's initial application. And then vichara is sustained application. And then the word for zest, that translation is piti. And then happiness is sukha. And here you have one pointedness. It's the same word that meant equanimity of emotion. It's ekagata, and you guys could probably say that better. But initial application is how you first kind of, the mind, the consciousness kind of attacks the object. It's like, boom, there's the object. Sustained is where you're really, really staying with the object. And then there arises this kind of energy, appreciation, zest. And then there arises this kind of really joyful happiness. And then this one pointedness focus. But as you get further up the jhanas, you just start in with the sustained application. Then you just start in with the zest, and you just more and more simply attain these cittas that focus very, very intensely on the object. So those are the jhana levels. And then we have what are they? Wholesome, resultant, and functional for each of them. So the wholesome are when you are in training and you are creating these cittas, you are making good karma. It's going to come back, okay? And then in the resultant cittas technically occur in the immaterial sphere, and some of these have to do with rebirth. But the resultant cittas are the cittas that are in this sphere that are existing because you have trained. And then the functional cittas are the arahants who just decide to do some jhana work, you know, just for fun. But it's not in the karmic field, Okay, I don't mean just for fun, but you know, the idea is that the arahants can dip into these types of cittas at any time, and it's simply functional. Okay, so the exact same kind of setup now applies to the oh, wait a minute. I skipped a page to the immaterial sphere cittas. Oh, I wanted to say one other little aside. The idea of zest is there's 5 grades of zest. And this is just to say how, don't memorize this. This is just to say how really bodily this experience was and also how fine-tuned it was. But I like this. So there's minor zest, which raises hairs on the body. Momentary zest is like flashes of lightning. Showering zest breaks over the body repeatedly like waves. Uplifting zest can cause the body to levitate. And pervading zest, which pervades the whole body as an inundation fills a cavern. So these are our descriptions of the levels of zest. Just to give you another example of the refinement of all this thinking, but also how I kind of like that. It's very poetic to me also, you know, somebody thought through, I'm not somebody, a lot of somebody's thought through the levels of zest. So now the immaterial sphere chittas are the ones that I'm thinking are set up just the same. And I don't even know if I have a screen share on them. Let's just go back to the big one here. So you can see it's the same thing where there's 4 levels of them, not 5. And there's the wholesome ones, the resultants, and the functional. In the same way, the ones that are creating karma, the ones that are existing because somebody did this, and the functional ones which are existing because arahants are in these chittas. Now these 4 levels are different from the jhana levels because the jhana levels have to do with the factors and the qualities of the concentration. The immaterial sphere chittas have to do with the objects of concentration. Okay, so they're kind of like, they're wild. They're stepping back so far. They're very trippy and they're very abstract. But so, you know, Bhante will fill in, but supposedly if you can attain the 5th jhana, then you can concentrate on infinite space, which is you remove the object altogether. And what's there after you've really perfected an object, really perfected concentration, you remove the object, infinite space is there. And then the next level is infinite consciousness. So you remove the space. Then you remove the infinite consciousness, what's there. That level is called nothingness. And then the 4th level is called neither perception nor non-perception, which is a very Zen-y-like impossible paradox. But the way it goes is the 1st and the 3rd are concentrating on the absence of objects. The 2nd and the 4th are concentrating on the 1st and the 3rd. So you attain the 1st, the 2nd really concentrates on the 1st. You attain the 3rd, the 4th concentrates on the 3rd. So those are 4 levels of immaterial sphere concentrations. These are very, you know, very beyond what I can really comprehend, I can just tell you about. But the main idea is that we are still advancing in this purification process and this training and in this development of citta that is extremely refined. Now, I have a great description of this kind of process from Ajahn Chah, who many of you might know, a Thai forest monk who started a couple of monasteries anyways. There's a wonderful article called Unshakable Peace, where he kind of describes going through this, and I want to read to you a little bit of it, just because he's wonderful for humanizing these things that I can't even really imagine. I'm going to read the first paragraph too. He says, the whole reason for studying the Dhamma, the teachings of the Buddha, is to search for a way to transcend suffering and attain peace and happiness. Whether we study physical or mental phenomena, the mind, citta, he says, or its psychological factors, cetasikas, it's only when we make liberation from suffering our ultimate goal that we're on the right path, nothing less. Suffering has a cause and conditions for its existence. That's a very anchoring statement to remind us. But I do think that this kind of awareness that this brings, I really can't trace from here to there why it does seem to reduce suffering. I'm just going to say that I feel that it does, but maybe we can talk about exactly why. I think it might relate to Kashita, what you were saying before about anicca, dukkha, anatta, that the more you know this, the more you're in touch with that, and the more you release, the more you let go. I'd say if there's an intervening step, it's there. So Ajahn Chah is talking about meditating. He's meditating. He's feeling kind of funny, he says. He was doing walking meditation in his forest dwelling place. And then he says, eventually I did take a break, but he's from his meditation, but it was only the posture of sitting that changed. My heart remained constant, unwavering, and unflagging. I pulled a pillow over, intending to take a rest. As I reclined, the mind remained just as peaceful as it had been before. Then, just before my head hit the pillow, the mind's awareness began flowing inwards. I didn't know where it was headed, but it kept flowing deeper and deeper within. It was like a current of electricity flowing down a cable to a switch. When it hit the switch, my body exploded with a deafening bang. The knowing during that time was extremely lucid and subtle. Once past that point, the mind was released to penetrate deeply inside. It went inside to the point where there wasn't anything at all. Absolutely nothing from the outside world could come into that place. Nothing at all could reach it. Having dwelt internally for some time, the mind then retreated to flow back out. However, when I say it retreated, I don't mean to imply that I made it flow back out. I was simply an observer, only knowing and witnessing. The mind came out more and more until it finally returned to normal. And then he goes on to describe it happens in waves a couple more times. But I think that is a very amazing description of probably what we're talking about in these chitas. But it's very human to me, and I like that he can do that. While I was looking up a little stuff on him during the break, I also found a YouTube that made me think of you, Lisa. It's called Keep At It. It's a great little like 2.5 minute YouTube of somebody talking about reading an Ajahn Chah piece about it's really about persistent practice, and that it is infallible, if practice is persistent. Okay, we have one more section of these chitas, and then we're going to take a big yay for all of us that we got through it. These are the supramundane chitas. As if these last few weren't out there enough, they are still in the mundane sphere. And these are completely transcendent. There are 4 path chitas and 4 fruit chitas. Actually, the path chitta is, the path consciousness is 1 chitta, but the fruit can be 2 or 3 mind moments. It can be repeated. But the path chitta is when an arahant reaches, or a near arahant reaches a certain level. Now to illustrate this, I think the easiest thing is this simple list. Sorry about all this back and forth. This is just like a total list of the 121. So are you able to see it okay? Make it a little bigger. Can you see that?
Yep.
Okay, thanks. So I'm just going to run you through, see where we've been already. Here are our unwholesome 1 through 12. Here are rootless, the difficult 13 through 30. Then we get the beautiful ones, and then the jhana. Here are immaterial sphere, right? No, our fine material sphere. Then here's our immaterial sphere. We just said the base of infinite space, the base of infinite consciousness, base of nothingness, base of neither perception nor non-perception, base meaning the object of what they're doing. So then, of what they're meditating on, sorry. And then here's our last little chunk here. And so there's 4 levels that I'm sure you've heard of I don't really know truthfully where an Arahant line is, but there's the path of stream entry, path of once returning, path of non-returning, and path of total liberation. Those are the 4 levels of just really, really extreme development and training and really approach to Nibbana in a big way, in a non-returning to samsara, to rebirth way. After this number 81, there's a chitta called Gotrabhu chitta. That's change of lineage chitta. That means you've changed your lineage from being a worldling to being one of these very elevated people. So now that magical thing about 89 and 121 is right here, because you can just count each chitta for each level, and then each chitta for the fruition levels, which are, you know, there's the path chitta where you enter it, and then the fruition where you experience it and enjoy it and kind of savor it. So there's 8 of those levels, so you could have 8, but some people break them down by the jhana steps also, if that's the way they trained. So then this one, you can go through all 5 jhanas and then experience it. This one, you can go through all 5 jhanas. So there's 8 steps. If you put in the jhanas, that makes them 40. And so 40 minus 8 is 32, and that's the difference between 89 and 121. If anybody ever asks you that on the street about the 121 and 89 difference, you now know what to say. So that brings us to the very last of the categories of chitta. And I think you can see this kind of ascension going through them. And I'm hoping you can see some kind of usefulness. Well, let's stop here for questions. And I have one more thing I want to show you. And I was thinking, since we have such dense material in a longer time, maybe we'd have 2 short breaks today. But first, yeah, are there any more questions on the 121 and what this categorization does for us, or what it helps us understand?
I'm looking at the chart you just showed. Does that mean a person becomes arahant, that his meditation level could be on jhana 1? So it doesn't equate to the jhana levels, right?
I think that they have to go through all the 5 levels, if I'm understanding it. Oh, you're saying that a person could go from 1 to arahant?
Because the chart that you have is let's say the entry or the stream entry, it has a jhana 1 to 5.
Right.
So this stream entry person could be at the jhana 4 level, concentration or meditation level wise, and the arahant could be at the jhana 1 level. Is that what it is?
I think according to this level, like to get to the path or the fruit, you have to go all the way 1 to 5. But I don't know if I don't think that's true in all training circumstances. And I'm over my head with this, so I'm gonna, if this is okay, say, can we bring this to Bhante? Because this is kind of beyond where my experiences are. I think that the idea of the path and the fruit is that you have gone through all the jhanas, then gone through the immaterial, and then had the Gotrabhu chitta, and then entered the path, the irreversible path to Nibbana.
Because I was thinking about the story Bhante was telling us, that that person asked the Buddha about the liberation or nibbana, and then later he wanted to be want to enter the order. Then he went out to look for a robe. Then he got killed. So would you say that person reached jhana 5, jhana 4?
Well, my personal opinion is that this, and I don't know because I haven't been there, you know, but
Me neither.
yeah. So it's just sort of how I put it together in my mind, and from listening to people who are more developed speaking. But I think that in the 121 I just laid out, that couldn't happen. But I don't think that that's the only way it can happen. This is a particular system where you go through every step. Like when you look at the Visuddhimagga, I mean, there's all these steps of what you have to understand, what you have to realize, what you have to study, what you have to do, what you have to focus on. Is very, very stepwise. So this 121 is the stepwise thing. You know, they talk about dry insight, where you don't go through the jhana trainings, but you just get a perception. Something causes you to see reality very clearly without practicing these types of stepwise trainings. That's what I think happened to that man that was in Bante's story. I think he just had a capacity. Now, maybe, I think sometimes people have minds that are like dry tinder waiting for a match. And maybe I'm thinking that because of the dry insight. But anyways, I think some people are like that. And maybe that is from past karma, that you're so ready. Yes, Kyle, when they're ripe, they're ripe. Yes, you're so ready. It doesn't take, 100 years of stepwise training. Something in, maybe you did 100 years of stepwise training in another life. But here you are, and boom, something happens. I think that can happen. Yeah.
That's Coach Sheila,
You're back to being a chipmunk, buddy.
Yeah, that was scary. Was that you, Kyle, trying to speak?
Oh, sorry. I was just, Corey and me talked at the same time. We were going to tell Toshida both his microphone was.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
I want to say this, the explanation of the jhana, like, how 89 types becomes 121 types, and each string entry have a different level of jhana. And then I saw that it was explained on page 71. If you start reading that, is in a summary, like, in detail. And he explained to you the different jhana of the stream entry. The first one is like initial application, and then you have the sustained application, and then you just get rid one by one, and it become the full jhana. Okay,
Yes.
so sometimes the level of the arahants, they reach different level of jhana. They are arahants, but they have a different level too.
Mm-hmm.
So this is why the 5 jhana, that if you attend to full to the path, you attend all the jhanas, and you also have the different levels.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And so you're saying the arahant could be at any of those levels.
Right. They arahant, they still have different levels of arahants.
Right.
Yeah. So this is how they spread it, break it up in different jhanas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So the jhana has a very light different, but still there are minor. Sometimes we say they still have minor, of a like a impurity,
Yes.
not fully, but they are arahant. So sometimes you have this the tense and the non-tense, So that's why they still have the level.
Yes.
It doesn't mean that you're arahant, you're full. You still have the level there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why it break up here in the 5 different, levels of jhana.
Thank you. Thank you. That's really helpful. And the arahant, can also experience different things at different times. I think, so yeah. I mean, I guess even arahants have good and bad jhana days. Yeah, on different levels. But thank you. And I think Bhante can fill this in, and it's one of his topics. But I wanted to, it's just an example of something that we can't talk about the chitta without talking about the jhanas, and because it's necessary information. So I'm just giving you a very cursory look at that, and Bhante will fill in more. So I have one more thing to close out this 121, and then maybe we'll take a break after that. Does that, everybody okay with one more thing? This is just something to look at it, like zoom out, and look at it. And it just is something that I was kind of thinking about to kind of summarize the unsummarizableness of it. But I was just thinking about, I think we have to never underestimate how carefully all of these categories have been laid out. It wasn't just like, well, this will be easy, we'll just do it this way. So I kind of wanted to look at the variables as they're laid out, and then think about what that tells us. It's kind of just an interesting thing to do with a lot of this, because, some, people thought long and hard about all of this. So in the Abhidhamma Sangaha, the first variable is, we just went through all of this. The first thing we looked at were the spheres, the domains in which the citta typically are found. So that's the first thing we looked at. So that's about reality. So it's kind of like, I think the first thing they start with is like, all right, let's get oriented. What realm are we in? Okay, that's the first, this is kind of an ethical clue. This is where you start. If you want to kind of fight ignorance, you need to know where you are in reality. Now, the realms of reality, while they are technically very defined, they're also experiences that we go through all the time. And I'm sure that some of you have studied the wheel and talked about how, there's a Buddha in each realm, and there's an experience we can relate to. Like we've all been hungry ghosts. We've all been titans. We've all been in the heavenly realms. We've all been in the hell realms. So I think just kind of staying oriented to the fact that we are affected by these realms. We should kind of have keep a big eye on where we are, and keep our perspective as broad as possible. That's kind of the first message, I think, that this categorization tells us. Now, the second thing is the kamic position. This is the ethical rank, the wholesome, unwholesome, resultant, Kirya Chittas. That's our second division. That's about cause and effect. So I think that's a very, very important statement too. Know where you are and be aware of cause and effect. Many of you might know there's a Zen koan about cause and effect, and I'm going to paraphrase it terribly, but basically the monk asks, is an enlightened person free of cause and effect? And one of the monks says yes, and he's turned into a fox for 500 lifetimes or so. And then he stays in the back of the monastery and studies for the 500 lifetimes as a fox. And then he comes to this different answer, and he says, an enlightened person is very respectful of cause and effect. So that kind of emphasizes that we are in a kamic flow all the time. It's so complicated, beyond what, we can perceive, but the more awareness you have, the more you do what, I was calling those course corrections, those little taps to the side where you're in a flow, but maybe you could flow a little more this way. And maybe that will, down the river, have a very good impact. That's why, we stay with our practices. Just this awareness of cause and effect is the next big thing they're telling us. They're giving us clues what to watch for, they being the architects of the Abhidhamma. The next thing they list is accompanied by feeling. And I find that very interesting as a psychologist, because feeling is the big problem. Feeling is what people talk about in therapy all day and all night. Emotion is really important to understand. And next class weekend, I'm going to talk about emotion and how the Abhidhamma deals with emotion specifically. But emotion dominates brain processes, and it also dominates karma processes, I think. Emotion is where we have this bodily kind of synthesis of our past states, and we tend to react with them. Emotion really can dominate consciousness processes, and I think that's why it's next up on the categorization agenda. So the next one is associated with view. Now, this is sort of about mindfulness, like just keeping an eye on where you are, not saying anything in particular about where you are, but are you aware? You know, are you watching your own process? We're also going to talk about some psychological parallels here later on about the capacity to observe process without reactivity. Because, you know, that's a base of Buddhist training. It's also a base of psychoanalytic theory too. So I think that's what the view is kind of nudging us towards. And the prompted or not thing is very funny, but I think it is about intention. And maybe that's the next most important thing to be watching. You know, if we don't pay attention, spontaneous habits will run us. And sometimes that's good news, and a lot of times it's not, as humans. And so training yourself to have spontaneous good intention is a huge effort and vastly important. So, so these are just some thoughts about the categories, but I think it's always good to ask, why did they choose these systems to emphasize in this order? So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts along those lines yourself, like where do the categories click in well for you, and where do they just kind of go make your head spin in looking at cheetahs?
Am I still a chipmunk? No, I think.
Sound
No.
good?
No, I'm good. All right, good.
Yeah,
So,
you sound like a person.
yeah, turn into a chipmunk. I guess that's my karma today.
Definitely, your next life, you'll be prepared, right?
Oh, yeah, exactly. So I think there's a correlation between, I can't remember where I read it, but I think there's a correlation between Buddhist cosmology and some of these chittas. So we have the sense sphere ones, the 54 sense sphere ones. Then we have 15 or so. They're not sense sphere, they are form sphere. So from my understanding or from my remembrance, we have the earth, then we have sense sphere heavens, certain number of sense sphere heavens. And I remember there is 15 form sphere heavens beyond that. And beyond it, there are 4 formless spheres.
Right.
To me, it's fascinating because there's a correlation between the 54 sense sphere chittas. Then you have the next 15, whatever the next 15, which to me seems to be related to the form sphere heavens. Then you got 8 or 20, depending on your categorization, which is one way or the other related to the arupa vachara, which is the formless sphere heavens. The point is, in my opinion, point is this is a mental process. So for someone who has developed the mind so well, they can go from earth to whatever the heaven they want to in a split second, because their mind is so trained, they can skip, jump, or go iteratively, whatever. So you can be on earth and in heaven at the same exact time. And I also think there's a correlation between why, if anyone wants to be enlightened, they need to be a human. Devas cannot be enlightened. They have to come down to earth to listen to Buddha. And I believe in the very top of the cosmological hierarchy, the last 4 Brahma worlds, If you are born into one of those worlds, you will never be enlightened because you're not going to hear Buddha speaking, because they are in that sort of a, that's what I heard, or that's what I remember. So ultimately, the take-home message for me is, this is not about going to heaven. This is about ending this whole thing and just getting done with it. If the objective is to go to a heaven or some other objective, I think it's going to backfire, and you can become rebirth and continue the cycle again and again and again.
Mm-hmm. No, I think I like your take home there. Rupert Gethin writes about how the cosmology and the psychology of it are very parallel systems. You could almost say that the mind is not only so powerful, you could be in heaven, the mind is so powerful that it is the heaven. Yeah, that these really are creations of mind. And that is what the realms are. They are different forms of consciousness minds. And, you know, from sitting here in this, you know, human realm with the experiences, you know, I have, it's very hard to comprehend, but not hard to believe, I guess I would say.
Not hard to imagine, very hard to comprehend. I fully understand what you mean. I share the sentiment.
Yes.
I mean,
Yes,
we can think about what heaven is, but we will never experience it, but we can imagine it in whatever the way we want it to be.
Yes, yes. And
So
I do believe that, you know, one way to define heaven is that it is a sphere of chitta that are developed beyond what.
Right. You can create your own heaven or hell on earth. I totally believe that, because it's a completely mind thing, and you can be the most wealthiest person on world, but your mind might be in a hell. So there you go.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And we feel that moment to moment, that creation. Yeah, it's really interesting. And this, you know, this study is really so much about trying to attune yourself to feeling it moment to moment, the creation of world that we do. It's just, it's so incredible. Yeah. Any other thoughts about where we are? Are you everybody holding up okay? You've made it through the longest and worst list, and the real problem is simply that it was the first list. It's a very basic list, but the real problem is that all these things we need to know to understand these are you know, embedded in later teachings. You know, I do, you know, I have to say, like, keep an eye on how you feel like tonight and your dreams and stuff, because I feel that this study can work on you in funny ways. And in my early days of studying, I used to just have a lot of breakthroughs of perception that seemed unrelated to what I was studying, which I think just have to do with the fact of how kind of hard we're all studying right now. So keep an eye out for that. And I hope maybe we can have some reports on that. But I think this is a good point to break. I think everything we're saying just emphasizes this really important idea that the path is developed through the chittas. And, you know, we're not, building muscles for this body. We are building chittas for this universe and purifying them and simplifying them. So, okay, you all are such nice people and troopers, and thank you. Let's take a 10-minute break. It's 3:31. Let's come back at 3:45. Let's take a few extra minutes. And then we're gonna look at how these chittas really are in action. And I think it'll be a little bit less dense, I'm hoping. Okay, we got a minute. I don't want to rush. States of mind, states of chitta. Well, what are dreams? It's, you know, the whole there's something so real going on, and something something that it's such a portal of communication from forces that are beyond us, I feel. Now, people vary on this. There are the very mechanistic people that say your neurons are firing and associative cortex is firing and you're warming up your brain for the day. Perhaps so, but I just feel like, you know, the messages are really amazing. And just before the class, I mean, I haven't been sleeping super great because my head's full of too much, and how to arrange it and, you know, bring it to you. But I did have a dream about layers of reality where, you know, in the dream, things were happening and I was like, this is breaking through into another layer of reality. This is breaking through into another layer of reality in the dream. And then I said, well, wait a minute. I have another layer of reality I can break into and I'm going to wake up and do that. And I was like, boom. And I woke up and I was like, that was really incredible. Just in case we needed a reminder of that point I just made about the first thing is, where are we in reality? What realm are we in? Well, good to focus on the question, but not like we can answer it, right? Yeah. So maybe we can, you know, see if you have weird dreams tonight, since we're talking about it. And if anybody does, jot them down, bring them back. You can put them on Slack, or if you're comfortable, bring them back in 2 weeks for class, and we can go over them and kind of look at them in Abhidhamma terms. Yeah, an Abhidhamma dream interpretation would be really fascinating. But I think that the one that I had it was partly just, you know, anxiety and stress, but it was because the things that were happening were pretty stressful. But it was also about like, we're together entering these different realms just by being here and kicking it around. So, okay, are you ready to go to the 17 steps of perception? This is really fun. Okay, so this isn't the next thing that comes up in this Sangaha. What happens next is the list of Chaitasikas, the mental factors, but I think you have a little feel for those. And I think this will help put Chitta in context. And I'm gonna put 2 things up on the screen. Here, okay. I want to arrange this. It's going to be a little hard because I want you to look at both of them. Just for a feel. I know it's too small to see, but can you just, you know, get the gist of these 2, and I'll read you the words that are on this one. So I told you about the beginning of the Abhidhamma study. So I was kind of further into it and things were kind of, you know, clicking along a little bit more. And I read this table on the left, which is a horizontal timeline. It's called a complete eye door process. That means that it is telling you all the steps of a complete visual object coming into the field, being met, and starting to be processed in 17 chittas. Now, a material object lasts 17 mind moments, but the processing, these are 17 different chittas. So I look at this and it's like got these different steps. Some of these chittas we've met in the categories, you know, I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, I feel like I saw something in some psychophysiology, something about this. So I searched around and I pulled up this other picture of the brain. That one is called something like processing from visual stimulus to reaction, something like that. Wait a minute, I think I wrote the real name. Oh, this one's called the sequence and timing of brain events from presentation of visual stimuli to a discrimination response. And I looked at these two things and I realized they are the exact same things. And I gotta just say, it really blew me away. I ran around, I'm like, seriously, talking about this to everyone. I remember talking to a cab driver. This was back in the days when there was cabs, not Ubers. And I remember saying, there's this thing and it's like 2,500 years old. And it's just the same as these scans, but it really is so the same. I know it's just another translation. It's just another language. It's just another way to look at things. But this is what I grew up with in, 20th century psychology training. And for it to match so step by step with the Buddhist steps, which are only known by adept meditation, just like I said, that's it. I'm in. I am so in. So let's walk through the complete I-door process in Abhidhamma terms. And then I'll just layer on roughly how the neuropsych matches up, just so you have a feel for that. But it was such a profound event when that happened. I was just like, oh my God. Okay, oops, I didn't mean to do that. I'm trying to move this one over for you. It's not working. Okay, I'm gonna do my thing where I stop the share and make you sit through it all again. Come back. Well, I just made it bigger. Is that okay for starters? I'll read it to you. I'm sorry. I'm having a little screen sharing problem here because I can't get this to fill this screen. Oh, wait a minute. Okay, we're there. Sorry. Okay, guys. Sorry, it's getting late, huh? Okay, this is a complete I-door process. And each of these numbers you see is at one chitta. Now on that brain that's cut open that's doing the same thing, they say that it takes, I think, between a fourth and a third of a second. So that's just an interesting kind of measure, but this is the same event. And we're going to walk through it. And there, it brings up some very interesting information besides things that we know. So this is a full event, and we have millions of events like this going on. Sometimes sometimes they come in the middle because there's no sensory processing. They're just a mind event. They come in at that step number 8. Sometimes we chop off the end of the events. They get frayed. All kinds of variations of this happen. But this is the basic setup for a full perceptual process using a visual example. Okay, we start with, prior to this occurrence, this phrase is stream of Bhavanga. If you can see it, it's B-H-A-V-A-N-G-A, Bhavanga. Now, this is a whole big thing, and it does sort of relate to dreams, actually. The Bhavanga is a term for non-active chitta consciousness. So it's a non-action action. It's like a potential state. I think it was kind of necessary to fill in some conceptual aspects of the Abhidhamma. But what it is, like the kind of consciousness when you're not dreaming, but you're dead asleep, or when you're in a coma, or also there are minute Bhavanga chittas in between other chittas. So it's a very weird concept. Narada Tara uses the term vacant. He says there's no real translation in Western psychology, but it's called the life continuum as the translation, because it's an essential condition for continued subjective existence. Now, somebody was asking about this yesterday, but the bhavanga is why you wake up and you kind of feel like the same person that went to bed. And the reason why it provides a kind of continuity of an individual existence is because in a lifetime, every bhavanga chitta has the same characteristics. And those characteristics come from the last chitta of the prior life. Okay, so there's a death chitta. It has certain characteristics. Within that 121, there are certain ones that can be death chittas, and it is accompanied by certain chaitasikas. Those characteristics become the characteristics of the bhavanga of the next lifetime, and it does not change through the lifetime. So anytime there is not active cognition, you are subject to some of the same qualifications as the death chitta of your last life. That's a mighty concept to work with. I've always felt like, you know, one thing I've always said in therapy is lives have qualities. I don't know why, you know, but then really the reason I came to Buddhism is because there were these unanswered questions from psychology, and that was one of them. Why do lives have qualities? I remember one person I worked with, her life was marked by improbability. At every single juncture, the single least probable thing happened to her. It was just wild. I mean, I can't tell you how many things that you go, what? It just was continuous. But what makes a life like that? Maybe this is an explanation.
Can you go over that again, Beth? Because I was behind in my typing, and I don't think I quite understood.
The bhavanga chitta.
Well, the last part, just the last part.
Okay, the last part is that the bhavanga chitta has certain characteristics. It is, these characteristics include which of the 121 types of chitta it is, but I'm going to say that there are some that can be and some that can't be. And it has certain chaitasikas that surround it, certain mental factors. These are the same throughout a lifetime. And the canonical explanation is that the death chitta, the last chitta of a lifetime, has these qualities, and the stream of consciousness that flows from that becomes the rebirth chitta and then the bhavanga chitta of the next life. So some of these qualities of our lives are directly related to the quality of chittas, the consciousness stream from a past life.
So
That's
would that, not to interrupt, but would that be like last thought moment?
It's smaller than that, but yes, then that is why there's such an emphasis on remembering your good deeds and trying to, you know, in many Buddhist traditions, trying to surround the dying person by remembrance of good karma. And there are specific objects for the death chitta that are technically specified, and Bhante is going to go into this, I think, when he talks about karma. But you know, there are signs of karma, signs of destiny. There are these certain types of objects, but you carry that object into the next life. And I think that this accounts for this kind of way lives have qualities. Now, it's not to say that lives can't change. It's saying that there are certain qualities that you're working with continuously to create that change. It's a very interesting concept, the bhavanga. And I know I put in the list, there's a good article by Rupert Gethin on it. It's a kind of a potential state, like crouched, like consciousness ready to spring alive. But Gethin says it is not different from consciousness, but consciousness operating in a different mode. So these are called bhavanga chittas, but they are not active cognition. So they are exceptional that way. So the term literally means factor of existence, and that's why it's called sometimes the life continuum. So Yeah, some people, I don't know if you've studied the Alaya Vijnana, but you know, in Yogacara, this concept kind of developed into some other things. Some people say it's the same as the Freudian unconscious mind, but it really isn't. That's kind of a topographical thing. This is a functional difference. But it's really about latent potentials that define individuality. And it's very, it's a difficult concept. But there's this stream of bhavanga. So say that this person who is about to experience this is in some very inert state. And then the first thing that happens is a past bhavanga and then a vibrational bhavanga. Okay, the past bhavanga is holding the past object it's holding the object of the past life, actually. And then there's this vibrational bhavanga, and then the arrest bhavanga. And so you know, it's kind of hard to get past the terms, but the bhavanga actually kind of vibrates, and then it chops off the stream of this inert consciousness flow. So there's this flow of these like moments of inert consciousness, and it gets chopped off because an object has impinged enough. And the first thing that happens in the active consciousness is that 5-door adverting step that we talked about with the like spider in the web. So the first thing that happens, and this is, as you might recall, a functional moment, it's not given comic definition, it's just like the correct sense consciousness. And this is, we are in a sense consciousness realm here. The correct sense consciousness arises. So since this is a visual example, the visual consciousness arises. It's interesting to think, like, you know, there's something called synesthesia where you can kind of blend your senses, but the correct consciousness is there. Like, you know, the rods and cones relate to light waves. They don't relate to sound waves, you know. So we're kind of set up for the correct consciousness to emerge, and that is the 5-door adverting. So now the kind of material aspect of consciousness is happening, because the next step is you have the eye consciousness, it's there, and then you have receiving, investigating, and determining. These are 3 chittas doing 3 activities. Everybody okay? I'm seeing some scowls just in the few people I'm seeing. Are there any questions? You okay?
If you could go back to the vibrational bhavanga and then the arrest or arresting bhavanga, which one of those cuts off the flow?
The arrest.
Okay, that makes
The
sense.
vibrational is just starting to go, wait a minute, and then the arrest goes, chop. I mean, I don't, you know, experience it well enough to really understand why it's like that, but that's the description. Yeah. But when we look at the neuropsych, it's very interesting that they choose that term, because what makes cells fire is vibrations on the membranes. You know, it's really interesting what makes neurons fire. Yeah. So, you know, I firmly believe that some adept arahant felt that edge and then went, and then felt the stop, and then felt the adverting, you know, step by step. And receiving and investigating and determining happen. Now we are starting to engage with the object of visual consciousness. Receiving is just like, it's there. It's before you've qualified it at all. Receiving is just, it's there. Investigating isn't where you're now really naming those qualities, you're starting to question them. And determining is when those qualities are starting to be determined, to be actually delineated. Now, this is right there, a huge juncture. And we're going to go through this, but we're going to come back to this juncture because I think this is perceivable. I really do. At this point, karma comes in, new karma. At this point, you're getting wholesome and unwholesome and making karma. The roots come in, the associations come in, the motivations come in. And when we look at the neuropsych, you're going to see how that connects brain-wise to the limbic system and the motivation system. This point kind of, some people say it's right on determining, some say it's like between 8 and 9. This point is called like the gateway to karma. This is where everything starts going amok. Narada Tara says free will plays its part here. And he adds that free will is in everything, but he says, true indeed, circumstances, habitual tendencies, environment, etc., condition our thoughts. Then the free will is subordinated to the mechanistic course of events. But there is also the possibility to overcome these external forces, and exercising one's free will generate either good or bad thoughts. So that's why this little juncture is so important. At this point, you can bring in right view. It's not like you can make it all happy and pretty, but you can bring in right view, or you can go into this associative, repetitive stuff. Now, I'm going to give you another quote, actually, because this is so important. Marapana in the Mechanics of Buddhism, or something like that. It is at this stage that one could exercise control over one's thought, even though the resultant citta, which commenced the process, being due to past unwholesome karma, originated from an unwholesome mental formation, directing the sense organ to an undesirable object. At this stage of the thought process, the beautiful mental factors could be deliberately employed to suppress the arising of an unwholesome citta and to direct it in a wholesome way. So that's very technical, but it's the same point. It's the difference between taking in something and making something of it, right there. And we are pattern making machines. That's what we do. Our human brain. It's the good and bad news for us, but it takes some insight into this to avoid this essential conservatism of our mind, the kind of repetition, the waste, the karmic downslide, the habit formation that can happen here. So, all right, an example. This is a point where one of those examples might help, right? But let me think of one. Well, just anything that you see, like I notice this driving. I don't know why, I do notice a lot driving. It's like you have this extra exoskeleton, so you kind of notice more things. But I've used this example before, but I saw this guy on the street, and I just saw him, and instead of just looking at him and going, guy on the street, I started having this aversion reaction, and I started kind of unfairly associating to aspects of his physical appearance, like his jacket looked tough and he was sort of bouncing and he looked a little aggressive. And I was just like adding all of this me stuff to what could have just been, there's a guy and then there's the next thing. And you can see how it creates bad karma. And if I was interacting with him, I'm sure I would have come across like, instead of just like, and so this is how these things proliferate on a very tiny scale. This is how they proliferate. But, this goes back, Freud did have a lot of really great insight. So one of them is the compulsion to repeat. And this is right there. He says, we may suppose, 1910, that from the moments at which a state of things that has once been obtained is upset, an instinct arises to create it afresh and brings about phenomena which we can describe as a compulsion to repeat. And we will just do that. We'll use something in our habit formations that have come from prior karma. And so then we can start looping there. At determining, mental objects come in. So that's kind of where association happens, right there. And we can either run away with our associations and the affects that are attached to them, or we can stay open to perception there. Mendes says, if you're aware of momentariness, you don't reuptake the object with attachment or aversion, and the object of previous karma vanishes. That's the plainest statement of it. I like that. I also think it's really funny that they use the word reuptake, because you know, that one of the very common classes of antidepressants are SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So the way they work is by stopping the mind's natural tendency to reuptake certain neurotransmitters in the synapses between brain cells. So that's what we do naturally. We just recycle them. To help with depression, the chemicals stop that reuptake. I don't know if it's metaphor, reality, what, I don't know, but I just find it interesting there. Because the next thing that happens is this Javana sequence. And the Javana sequence kind of seals the deal comically. Now, the word Javana literally means something like to run swiftly. And it refers to kind of impulsions, like going over the object. Like the first, it kind of goes in an arch. The weaker cheetahs are at the end of it, and in the middle, like 12 and 13, they're stronger. But if you bring in a habit formation, an unwholesome association, those Javana will just roll over it and kind of reinforce it. The Javanas, that's the stage of karma production. They are the same type of cheetah, whatever. There are certain cheetahs that can be Javana cheetahs, and whichever one starts the series, it'll go through the whole series. Whatever Chaitasikas are with it, they will go through the whole series. It's kind of like just the way we sort of seal the deal mentally. So they're impulsions. I think this almost, I can almost get an edge of experiencing a kind of a pulsation of belief building in a moment. Have you ever had that feeling where you're like, yeah, you know, kind of like that? Well, that's, I think, Javana series. I don't know. I may be exaggerating it, but it's something like that. So they build, the cheetahs and the mental factors kind of build on each other in this feedback loop, and they increase attention in this wholesome or unwholesome way through this series. You just pay more and more attention to it and build it. So again, the Javana's moral direction is not based on what the object is, or even how you feel about it, but it's on whether it's being viewed rightly, or whether it is, you know, with a yoni, so manasikara, with wrong view, whether you're clutching to it. This is also very similar to, and the wheel, the links of the wheel, they talk about breaking the link between clinging and grasping. It's very similar. Like we have contact, we have feeling. These are links on the wheel, you know, so we have contact, we have kind of spontaneous feeling. We might cling to it, but it's stopping the grasping. It's stopping that kind of secondary level of holding on that is our effort in breaking the chains of samsara and dukkha. But it really is dukkha to me, that kind of running over and over that past formation. That's like psychic pain. And that it can occur in the Javana. Okay, so then there is 2 moments of registration in this full perception. They are not in everything. And registration, the word means taking or having the object. Now, that might have to do with short-term memory or something, that registration. But it's where you kind of hold and savor the object for a second before you return to the stream of bhavanga, before the next perception or the next occurrence of active processing. So let's take a minute here and tell me what questions you have about this, a third of a second thing that happens.
I always thought, go ahead, Jeff. Go ahead. I spoke earlier.
That's okay. I mostly just had a comment that when we were talking yesterday about what do you do when you get angry, and I said there was a gap between when anger starts to arise, then you have a choice how to react. That's what I was talking about. I didn't know how to explain it, but that's it, I think.
Exactly it. And the anger is very frequently based on a past formation. The examples were given, somebody's like hurting someone in prison, that's a current thing, but most of the anger and irritation that I encounter is just formations. If you realize that and drop it, the occurrence itself is a non-issue very frequently. Yes, that's exactly a point of anger intervention. Very tiny point of anger intervention, but powerful.
Taking a deep breath, I think, is the same idea. So if you're angry, take a deep breath. So to slow down the whole process and not let the automatic javana kick in, I guess. So don't let that kick in. Just stop the process and let it die down.
Yes.
I was going to say earlier, I believe the chart you showed is also correlated to the 5 aggregates, the Rupa Vedana Sanya Sankara Vijnana, the object, feeling, perception, mental formation, consciousness. So the stream of bhavanga, past vibration, vibrational bhavanga, arrest, 5-door adverting. I think there's at least in my understanding, there's a direct relationship between the 5 aggregates and this whole process of Chetasika, the sequence. It's just a further refinement, further breakdown of the whole process in Abhidhammic term, or in the most minute time instance.
That's very interesting. Next weekend we are going to talk about the khandhas a lot, and it'll be easier because we'll be on like the human scale. But I think that's very interesting. The initial part of the sequence is more about form.
Right.
But then I think the reactivity always includes affect or emotion, and then the mind formations, the sankhara, come in.
Right.
And it is all a series of chittas.
Right.
It's all based on it. So that's an interesting breakdown. I like that a lot.
Right. So the way I thought about it always is what makes color green. Green is because I already have a preconceived notion of what color green is. So that's the way I kind of try to relate this, the whole notion where, so for example, in this chart, we have the vibrational bhavanga and the arrest bhavanga. And all of a sudden, that means there's something that needs to be sensed. And all of a sudden, our sense doors open up. One of the sense doors pick it up. If it's the eye, if it's an eye object, the eye picks it up. Preconceived notions. It's a color. What color is this? Again, preconceived notion. It's green or black or blue or whatever. And there we go. So you identify the color.
Yes.
So that's the reason I think sometimes we run into situations where 2 different people looking at the same exact object from the same exact distance. One person saying it's a rabbit, the other person is saying a fox. But in my opinion, it's neither a fox or a rabbit, if you think about it, because it's just 5 aggregates. You just come up with your own notion of what it could be.
That's right.
What is that guy? The guy. The Yeti. What is the US equivalent of the Yeti?
Sasquatch.
There we go, Sasquatch. So who is the Sasquatch? I don't know, it could be a bear, it could be actually a Sasquatch. So
Yes.
that's how I think of the Sasquatch. It's just someone made up something.
Exactly. And we are these, we've made all these patterns, we have these ways, we are so selective in what we choose to look at, and then that builds on the patterns and reinforces them. It's just really incredible, the truth of subjectivity that comes in here.
That's very beautiful. I thank you for that. I think that's very critical, because if you truly objectively look at these things, you can have a profound truth about it, but we always look at things from our own subjective viewpoint. We see what we want to see, not what exactly is there, which is important. And I appreciate that. That I think is a very profound idea.
Yeah, oh, it definitely is. And actually it's not even just pointing out subjectivity, it's actually trying to explain it as its own phenomena. This is how subjectivity arises. And as all these things combine on all these scales, and we take in perceptions and we associate, and we have these lifetimes that are within these parameters, which may have to do with the death chitta of the prior lifetime and may have to do with whatever. There's so many variables at work. And, we're reminded that one very important principle of the Abhidhamma is that there is no agent. There is no agent doing this stuff. There are just all these phenomena interacting. And these are all these different ways just to look at phenomena interacting. And we can call these ways 17 steps of a fox or 17 steps of a rabbit, but these are just ways to look at phenomena that are interacting, and that somewhere under this, these phenomena are irreducible Dhamma. And it's really a lot to take in. There's a mango. Yeah, it is actually a mango. A simile for this that has to do with mangoes. I was going to say sutta, but it's in the suttas. But would it help to run through that and look at the steps? Because I think, it's just a helpful simile. But I think it would be one thing that I was wondering if we could actually do, and this is similar to what we were thinking about earlier, is think of your own similes for these 17 steps, because it's just a way to explain it. But this is in the, it's not in the suttas, I'm sorry, it's in the commentary, the Hatha Salini. The mango simile is that a person is sleeping at the foot of a mango tree, and that's like being in the Bhavanga stream, inert consciousness. And a ripe mango falls and grazes their ear. So this is like the arrest Bhavanga. An object intrudes or impinges enough to stop the stream of Bhavanga Chitta. And then the person wakes up, which is like the 5-door adverting. They wake up. The eyes open and look, that's like eye consciousness arising. And then receiving and investigating chitta are like reaching for the mango and squeezing it. Okay, so just reaching for it, it's there, squeezing it. I'm now working with it a little bit. And then determining, going into a deeper sense, in the simile, determining is smelling the mango, which I think is very interesting, because smelling is such a deep, smelling is deep in the brain stem. It's a very deep sense. So they smell it and determining. Then the javanas are like eating the mango. And registration is like swallowing it and appreciating the taste of the mango. And then this person lies back down, goes to sleep, back into the Bhavanga stream. That's another way to kind of work through it. But to make that point that I just made a little more eloquently, here's a quote from Bhikkhu Bodhi. The momentary chittas themselves exercise all the functions necessary to cognition, and the unity of the cognitive act derives from their coordination through laws of conditional connectedness. So I like that. There's no self here. There are just these events happening. And we can really see them as the elemental pieces of how we weave together a sense of a self, but there's no agent. Okay, so you're stretching. I have, would you like to take a break or throw on the neuropsych parallels now? Oh, Bante's here. Yay. Maybe we should just throw on the neuropsych for, I mean, if you're interested in it, for the science aspect of it. Okay, I'm going to put that back up, and I'm just going to run through the two things. Okay, I want to put back up. Okay, here are our two things. Okay, so I'm going to move this one a little bit. Okay, so I'm just showing you, here is the eye, okay? And this is so incredibly complicated. And later when we talk about sense spaces, we're gonna talk about this, but the rods and cones that determine color, basically like each one of them has like something like 10 million cells that determine 3 colors. And everything we see is just based on colors. All our depth perception, all the edges, is just color. So that's the first thing that happens. And that is kind of like, that is set off by a vibrational action in the cell membrane when waves hit it, light waves. And so that's the vibrational bhavanga, and then the stream stops and we orient to it. Now, 5-door adverting is this little thing here, the lateral geniculate nucleus. I don't really know what it is, but it is the relay station in the brain that sends that impulse that started with a vibration. It sends that impulse back to the occipital lobe. So it's not going to send a visual impulse to the auditory cortex. It sends it to the right place. So that is your adverting. So we're back here. It's a little hard to see in the, okay, back in the, okay, sorry, I'm getting junk. Okay, but in the back, the occipital lobe is in the back of the brain, which doesn't really make any sense, but that's where it is. So it gets sent back there. And there's a primary occipital cortex and a secondary. So the primary is just noting that there's a visual object, which is very much like receiving. And the secondary starts to examine the qualities of the object visually, and that's very much like investigating. Okay, and then there's what's called tertiary cortex, which mixes in different kinds of information, like where is this object oriented in space, proprioceptive information. And that starts to really determine what the object is. So right there, I'm gonna call that the determining citta. I mean, I'm sort of just making all this up, you know, but it also really works. So I think it's interesting. Okay, so then we go to this inferior temporal lobe. See this line right in there? Like if you do your fist like that, your thumb is basically your limbic system. And that's basically in there. Your limbic system is where emotion and affective associations start to come in and mix in with the stimulus. So now we're starting to associate. So I think we're kind of in the Javana series here. And especially as we go to the prefrontal cortex, the prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain, just very roughly, I'm being so cursory, but anyways, the part of the brain that basically knows what time is. It's where planning and intention come in. You know, motivation and emotion are coming in here, and then we get to the prefrontal cortex, then we're really planning. And then we go up here to the premotor and the motor cortex, which is where intention is translated into bodily action. Now, Bhante is going to teach you about bodily intimation, which is a physical process. Remember this point when you hear that, because that's what's going on up here. Bodily intimation, that instant before intention becomes action. And then boom, down to the spinal cord, and the finger presses the button, and we're off to the races and running with our karma. So I don't think that I'm super straining to match these. I know I'm perhaps overly impressed with how much they match, but it really is kind of, there are junctures where it just seems very obvious to me. Now, that is not to say that I think a Javana is a brain process, but that is to say that all of these processes are so interwoven that layering in a mechanistic bodily biointerpretation doesn't hurt to me. It could be part of how this is all working. Because remember, the proximate cause of chitta is mentality, materiality together. So, Bhante, are you there? And how are you doing? He might not be completely on. Well, tell me, let's take a break here for questions for sure. What are you noticing in this, and how does the kind of variety of languages from simile to brain mechanistic stuff to Abhidhamma technical stuff, how does that influence you or affect how you absorb it?
I find it fascinating that they figured this out 2,500 years ago, and that you can lay that chart right almost on top of the 17 steps of perception and trace it.
Yes.
Scientifically.
Yeah, I feel that too. You know, this is the brain image isn't very new. I think that book's from 2000, but I mean, sure, there were MRIs and PET scans involved and all of this machinery. And in the Abhidhamma chart, there was just meditative insight. That's all. Yeah, it really is incredibly impressive, I think. I mean, it's not like we need proof here, but it does layer on this layer of, I don't know, kind of validation in language that we know that's different. Well, well, I have one thing that relates to this, but I think I'm going to save it. Do you feel like you need a break? Give me a thumbs up if it's a good idea.
I think it would be a good idea just to
Yeah.
decompress a little bit.
Okay. We'll come back just a little bit to this, and then just, I think this is the main point for today. So we'll just come back and do a little experiential and talk about it some more, and maybe put in one more thing. So it is 4:36. Let's 4:50 Central Time. Let's come back and talk some more. Okay.
Thank you so
guys
much.
are hanging in great. Thanks. Back in town here. How's everyone doing?
My head hurts. No, I'm just kidding.
It's
It's a lot. You know, I'm really, really good at Googling things, and I found somebody's else's explanation on mind and its passive and active forms that broke down everything, and I got really excited until I realized it's missing one. but it starts off with the stream
Mm-hmm.
and then it goes straight into vibrates.
So
So
this doesn't mention the past Bhavanga.
yeah.
That's
So
okay.
yeah, but I also know it's on page, what page is it?
In the comprehensive.
Yeah, 155, I think it starts on.
Yep. Yep.
So
You got it. But what you found was similar. It's in Narada Terra's book too, a very nice explanation. He does it vertically.
okay, well, this one's on Access to Insight. It's Weagle 322.
Would you throw it on Slack later? Because maybe you already did.
No, I didn't. Do you want me to put it in the Abhidhamma one or?
Yeah,
Okay.
if you would, because I'd like to check it out. There are different, of course, many different summaries of it. But yeah, it is a lot. I don't know how to slow it down, but it's just what I will tell you though, we're going to continue with the processes of mind next weekend, but we're going to get off of this scale. So I think it will feel very, very different. We'll be, entering with the skandhas or the khandhas, and by working on a more bodily scale, it's a lot, I think, less of the mind strain that this can be. But I still feel that it's really worth this effort to dip down here. And I hope that, it isn't giving out too many headaches.
I still don't feel as overwhelmed as I did in the sutta class, so you're okay.
Really? Wow. I'm surprised that the suttas could be this overwhelming. Yeah, well, the suttas in some, there's some of the suttas that are simply Abhidhamma in talk. There's somewhere they say they just go, there's so many suttas that go over this information. There's such an overlay between the two systems. So some of the suttas are hard in the same way as the Abhidhamma.
Yeah, well, we also crammed a lot of suttas into a short amount of time. So that was
that'll do it.
Yeah.
That'll do it. Yeah. But
time of day, I just want to, at this time of day, it's not so much the subject matter, is that it's been 2 full days for us.
Yeah.
So, the last part of the day, we'll start to go into brain dead, and then tomorrow we'll be brain dead. So it's fine. It's known. So,
yeah, that makes sense to me. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I'm feeling it too. It no matter, how much I really love the material or I've gone over it, it's still like very mind boggling to me.
Exactly. Too. But we're fine.
Yeah.
We'd rather have the information.
Right. And I want you to have it because this is what the Buddha taught us. Mm-hmm. This is what has come down to us. So we need this information. And it will help. I really hope. And do keep an eye on dreams and perceptions, because I feel there's something special about raw Abhidhamma. Like, for those of us who, I'm pretty much a vegetarian plus sushi. So it's kind of like sushi to me. It's just so plain and raw. Okay.
Would you repeat the last, before we went on break, you said the proximate cause of chitta is practicality and materiality?
Oh, mentality and materiality.
Mentality.
It's nama rupa, mentality, materiality.
Okay.
There's yeah. And so the point I'm making is, consciousness is embedded in these processes, but, it is important to remember that the brain does not equal the mind. And, the Dalai Lama is very big on brain research. And that part where Bhante was showing us the brain research was when my computer kicked me off Zoom for a few minutes yesterday. So I missed some of that, but, like the Dalai Lama believes that some of the subtle processes we're describing can be detected in the brain, but that pure awareness does not have a literal material correlate. And, in the cosmology of the Abhidhamma, there are some forms of consciousness that exist, independent of material
correlate.
Yeah.
He was using his dictation software. I muted him again.
Oh, okay. I thought I was just having a little bit of an echo in my head. Yeah. But actually there are also forms of materiality without consciousness in the Abhidhamma, and when you get into the very elaborate cosmology. So it's interesting to consider. But the idea that these citta are embedded in the processes of mentality and materiality together is, I think, as far as I can go with it. But I want to do a little exercises similar to what we did before, but I'm going to make a sound, and I want, now that you're informed, because before you didn't know all this stuff about your 17 steps, and let's try to catch the gateway to Kama. So I want you to jot down or just think or whatever, what was the actual sound you heard? This is very hard, the sound. And then try to catch your first association, try to catch your first affective linkage in the association. Okay, you ready? Okay, did you catch that? Were you able to kind of hearing, and then feel the flush? I'm seeing some nods. Can anybody describe or tell what you wrote or what you felt?
I heard the sound, and I immediately saw or filled in that somebody dropped a book. I could actually see the book.
And any emotional, could you catch any type of emotional or personal associative?
Yeah, it's something I'm working on. I'm very materialistic, and I'm like, oh no, I hope it's not broken is my initial like.
Yep. Okay, so it set off actually an anxiety type of reaction.
Yeah, me too, Corey. I thought it was a stapler and it was broken or something. It broke something.
See, I thought stapler, and then I was like, cell phone. No, I hope it's not broken, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. No, it's an alarming sound. It is an alarming sound to hear something. I think even before we say stapler and book and stuff, there's something wrong in the sound, right? It's sort of alarming. That sound is not supposed to be happening. It's the sound of an accident. It's the sound of a fall.
Yeah, I think it's just because I have 4 cats and I hear that sound a lot.
Yeah. Yes, you're very desensitized to that sound. That's funny. Well, it was a pen, but I was careful not to make it one of my favorite pens just in case something happened.
But I think that's part of the cue too, right? Because we have previously heard of accidental sounds, we all immediately associate whatever the sound we heard to something that fell, something that might have broken or not. So I think if it's a completely new sound, an alien sound, if we don't know what the sound is, then I think it would be a lot more interesting because we already have a preconceived notion of something similar that has happened to us in the past. We kind of associate the noise to something that might have fallen off, broken or damaged whatsoever. So that part I think is, that's what I was thinking. I was trying to concentrate my mind, running with my thought process, associating all sorts of things to this now and thinking about whether it's broken or not, whether someone is hurt or not. And I tried to catch my mind at that exact moment thinking, wait a minute, nothing really happened. I don't have to run with it. I just need to stop.
Yes, it's very interesting, but I don't think there's I really, well, I'll have to work with this. It's hard for me to imagine a sound that would not be familiar and have association.
It was just an example. I didn't mean like
Yeah.
coming up with a new sound, but
Yeah, well,
I was
but
just
I'm working with it. I'm working with it because
Correct.
it's an interesting concept.
And,
Francesca, you have
quick
a thought?
point. Does cognitive dissonance play into this?
Tell me more how it would.
I'm not quite sure. Well, it's you were talking about this crash. You know, people may have heard it as a crash, and that's bad.
Mhm. Well, cognitive dissonance is usually when there are opposing cognitions. Yeah.
Like
yeah,
it
so
could be a
maybe,
good falling sound, based. You know,
well, maybe it's just that like we want, we're in Abhidhamma class, we want the sound to be okay. And it's like, the teacher's giving us a sound, but it's an alarming sound. Yeah, so maybe there's a kind of a dissonance there. You're trying to make it okay. Yeah,
that was one of the thoughts that occurred to me. Crash bang. What is this?
Right. I have a thing that I identify in my meditation called make it okay energy, where instead of just letting it be, I'm trying to make it be okay. And I think maybe you kind of had a moment of that, like, and we do that because we don't like the initial anxiety. I mean, I think that I did think of this before. I just wanted something loud enough that you would hear it. But there is something very natural about the idea that falling is an out of control process, and we don't like that. Now, like when I actually heard it, there was a little ripple, went because it kind of rattled for a second. But once, that's an exaggeration to call it a second, the rattling probably was, I don't know, a less than a second, I would say. But then we don't like that arising of a kind of natural fear of out of control processes. And so we kind of then make up something that makes it okay, or tries to. So you have not only reacted, but you've reacted to your reaction. Yeah, in a split second. Yeah.
When I first heard, because I knew that would be the sound that you created. So I was just trying to listen what that was, and I heard two different sounds, and it sounds like something dropping, and that's it. It stopped, and I didn't feel like I need to go into any further what that was, because it was something that you told us already. You created the sound.
So you were able to just have this kind of neutral equanimity about the sound.
Okay, because I heard other people say something, I feel like, then how come I didn't try to associate it further? What could it be, or with the emotion? I didn't have those.
Well, you simply didn't, and you're making a case for right attention there, I think. And in a way, for you use the information to set up right attention. You're like, she's going to make a sound. It's just going to be a sound. See what it is. And you didn't go further with it. So in a way, I think you kind of achieved the break between clinging and grasping to the stimulus. You just went on to the next thing. There's a sound, and now my next thing is happening, instead of making a lot of it. So that's kind of cool that you were able to do that.
But at the same time, if she was already anticipating you're going to drop something, she already has a preconceived notion of what she's expecting. So I'm not necessarily sure.
Yeah, I was expecting, because she already told us that she was going to make some kind of sound and want us to differentiate what that was. But once the sound happened, this is it.
Yeah, you weren't expecting a falling sound. You were just expecting a sound. So you opened your hearing consciousness and you just let it reside there. And I think you let it go, as Francesca just wrote. Yes. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's interesting. I think you were able to do that.
So do you do this experiment often, with this, I guess, exercise? Or is this something?
No, I don't. The dropping one I just came up with today for you guys.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and I do things with trying to catch percepts, and also I do things with, and this is interesting if you want to take this further, turning percepts into thoughts. And then if you take your thought and well, we could do this, take your percept and categorize, make a thought. So maybe your thought was, oh no, did something happen? Maybe your thought's that question. And then you frame the thought, and then you say it silently to yourself 3 times. Actually, let's do that. Like, make a thought of what happened, and then say it silently 3 times. Okay. Now, if you're in my Sangha at home, you have to write it down too, but that's okay. That's another layer. We do a lot of writing exercises. What did you think? What did it feel like to say it 3 times?
So each time I said it, it just become less and less impactful. Like it held less and less meaning.
That's interesting. That's again a case of desensitization.
It was just the opposite for me.
Okay, your thought, how did it change?
It was more material. The more I said it, the more it visualized.
Reified, yes?
Yeah, oh,
Yeah.
reified, that's cool. Actually, I don't think those are necessarily contradictory, because we sometimes numb ourselves with these reifications. It's kind of interesting, but it did change. It did change. That wasn't one thought 3 times. That was 3 thoughts. As is the fact that there really is no distraction from the past and the future. There are thoughts that we label memory or anticipation. They are present mental objects. And this kind of gives you a little bit more of a sense of how this all builds up into cognitive processes that we recognize. But those 3 thoughts, whatever happened to you, they were 3 different occurrences, even if the words were the same. Is anything else that anybody noticed from playing around with these mental states?
When I first said it, I saw you holding up your pen because you showed it to us. And the second, I noticed that it had ridges on it, which was what caused the rattling. And the third time when I said it, I visualized the pen rolling off the desk and onto the floor.
Wow, that's very acute realization that you caught the vibrational bhavanga of the pen. That I didn't mean for you to see it, but oh, you mean afterwards, or you saw me drop it?
You're muted.
Yeah, afterwards, you did show it to us, so I had that impression on me already.
Gotcha. Yes. So you incorporated later. That's interesting because you actually incorporated later material into the initial event. Because then you saw the pen, then you're like, oh, the rattle, and you're putting things together. And this is how we construct memories that are sometimes accurate portrayals of occurrences and sometimes not, because we start mixing in. I could have dropped this pen and showed you this pen, but I wouldn't drop this pen because I really like it and I think it's a little more fragile. So yeah, it is interesting, like playing with cheetahs, but I think it gives you a little bit more of a feel, and the proliferation, like once we have a thought like, That pen has ridges, and that's why it rattles. That is zillions of occurrences away from that weird sound. You know, just zillions. And language and the whole structure of language. Language in relation to chitta is a very difficult thing that I've thought about. I don't know what to say except that if I could use a metaphor again, you know, it's kind of like I would consider language like an electrical wiring system, and the chitta are like the electrons moving in it. But it's so deeply ingrained as a structure for chitta. It's like such a complex roadmap for chitta or something. That we all have a sense of language, even if we all know different languages and use language so differently. I was just wondering if you wanted to bring in the chat questions, because they were very interesting and I looked at them over the break. Jeff, you had a really interesting question. Do you want to tell us any more about it, or has everybody seen it on the chat?
If you didn't see it, I'll just read it. I was wondering about the role of reflex in table 4.1 that you were showing us, because I know that has a different way that it works through the brain too. And sometimes if a reflex that wouldn't usually have a karmic result, but then I started thinking about somebody with Alzheimer's or somebody that is performing an action unintentionally, but still performing that action that if you were to do it intentionally would have a karmic result. And it's interesting to think about where that would fall on this scale, because like in the case of somebody with Alzheimer's, they're not in a state of bhavanga, you know, it goes beyond that, I think. So, but where? I don't know.
Yeah, that's very interesting question. And I really don't know. It's not, I mean, they are still having the chitta arising, but the associative process, you know, when I talk about the pattern making machines that we are, that has broken down for them. And maybe in a certain way, this is an example of how the pattern making machinery is useful to us. And it keeps us interacting with each other in these known ways. And I think that is a big part of what is useful about our tendencies. It's only like it's a problem when we start bundling them into a self, relying on them too much, clinging to them, and like over identifying and not remembering that they're a construction. But pattern making tendencies help us be together as a species. And so somebody with Alzheimer's, or if you've ever spent time with somebody in a floridly psychotic state, you will understand how important the pattern making is for us to be able to be together, to share space and interact. So I guess all I can think of was this person is, I think they're still going through the 17 steps of perception. But I think that the associative piece of it is awry. So maybe there's no association, and maybe there is an incorrect association, because I know sometimes people with Alzheimer's have a lot of panic and anxiety, like sundown syndrome and stuff. So maybe there are like incorrect associations built in.
I guess it's hard because we don't really know what they're perceiving either. So
Right.
I guess there's no way to really know how it fits in. Now that I think about it.
Right. No, but it's worth thinking about, because these are permutations of the process. I think it's very interesting to think about. Is there anything else in the chat? Because I have one other thing about Okay, I just quick looked at it about permutations of the process. And this is from this Nyanaponika Thera book. And he has this beautiful way about talking about processes like this very simply. And he talks about how we chop off our perceptions. Now, this is kind of maybe related to your question. It's kind of the opposite problem of the proliferating it determining. He's talking about how sloppy we are mentally, and that we just roll through these processes and we stop staying aware of them. So he's writing about the power of mindfulness here. And so, so I'm going to read a little bit of what he says, because he's just got a really nice language. Generally, we are more concerned with handling and using things than with knowing them in their true nature. Thus, we usually grasp in haste the very first few signals conveyed to us by a perception. Then, through deeply ingrained habit, those signals evoke a standard response by way of judgments such as good, bad, pleasant, unpleasant, useful, harmful, right, wrong. These judgments, by which we define the objects in relation to ourselves, lead to corresponding reactions by word and deed. So then he's talking about how attention, very rarely do we spend attention. He's talking about attention span any longer than is needed to receive the first few signals. So for the most part, we perceive things in a fragmentary manner and thus misconceive them. So he says a world perceived in this superficial way will consist, I like this, of shapeless little lumps of experiences marked by a few subjectively selected signs or symbols. I like that. So that's kind of talking about that determining point. We're just going around with these little blobs and reacting, and reflex does come in here. And he talks about how, these selected signs and symbols, like I was saying, it's so, we leave out so much of perception, but we select what we have decided matters to the self that we are, that we've constructed. And he says these grave consequences issue from the fundamental perceptual situation, our rush into hasty or habitual reactions after receiving the first few signals from our perceptions. So I think that Nyanaponika Thera is arguing for mindfulness being exactly this same process of staying awake at determining, at that juncture. That is the core of mindfulness. And, and it's interesting, these last two chittas, the registration chittas, I've been thinking about those. There are laws of how they work and which chittas they can be and stuff, which I will not go into because I just couldn't at this point anyways. But registration chittas only occur with a very full percept. And so after reading this book, I thought maybe I should just focus for a while on registration chittas and just kind of go through my day trying to register things a bit more. Trying not to react at the determining and trying to follow it through. And it is a very interesting process, and I really do notice how much chop there is in perception, how much just like quick jumping. And I think that that's probably more a problem in our culture than it used to be, clearly more of a problem in our culture than it was in the culture that created the Abhidhamma. But that's just another interesting way to look at this. This is really mindfulness in a nutshell too, I think.
This is exactly why eyewitness identifications are so flawed.
Absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. They don't even use those anymore, is that correct? Or rarely?
Unfortunately, prosecutors depend on them regularly.
They do still. Oh, I thought that was less. Yes. Yeah. Amazingly flawed. Memory is a very interesting topic. A little mysterious to me, because I don't think we really store things. But we sort of increased probabilities. Maybe I would think of associations as increasing probabilities that certain things will occur. Kind of like in quantum physics when they talk about the probability cloud that we're in. It's a kind of a probability cloud of cheetahs, of next moment cheetahs also.
I was thinking about your saying the registration part. Does that mean when we meditate, we would taught to observe and not to react, and to stay, how we practice to stay equanimous, meaning we could arrive at that registration part more often?
I think so, because yeah, I like how you said that, but because I think that if we disrupt the flow by our activity, I think we disrupt the registration process. So you probably registered that sound of the pen drop. I would say in the examples that we discussed, yours was probably one that had 2 registration cheetahs with it. You really listened to it, registered it. I think probably when we have quick emotional reactions and associations, we probably break that chain there.
Yeah, I think it was over at that Vipassana meditation retreat. We were taught that how to break the chain where that the feelings will come into play. Because once the feeling comes into play, it's either aversion or pleasure, then we're gonna react right after that. So the best part to break the chain is where once you have that feeling, you have to be aware of it and not to have any action to follow after that. And that the action is what creates the karma from.
Yes, I think that's a perfect description. And it's kind of like that point between clinging and grasping, because the feeling will make you grasp or push away. And you don't need to do that. So yeah, so that's what creates the karma. And yes, and also, it's kind of interesting because it is almost like saying if you create a cheetah that observes a calm, I mean, if you kind of bring in right view there, that is a form of a cheetah. And then you are creating wholesome karma. So then the Javana series is a right view, wholesome series of cheetahs. And then you are creating positive karma or wholesome.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for bringing in that description. I'm feeling like people are looking fairly tired. Do you feel like we should wrap up for today? I could give you one more chunk of information, but I just feel like I'm seeing saturated.
But I thought it would be interesting to hear from your experience when you were seeing your patients or your clients. So then we can apply what you experienced or what you see to what you taught us today.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. That's helpful. And that I think that'll be easier on you. If I can think through something. Well, a lot of what I hear in therapy is habit formations that are hard to break. And therapy is a kind of a beautiful system for breaking habit formations because they are usually evolved in interaction, these kinds of habit formations. So, the whole idea of therapy is that you kind of see the transference is actually seeing a habit formation in an interaction. Does that make sense to everybody? Everybody know what I mean by transference? So let's think. Sometimes people will come in reporting something like they are being continuously triggered in a close relationship. And so that, okay, here's an example from last week. In a couple, this is a couple of two women. One woman was really, really stressed at work, and the other one's father had open heart surgery. And there was this terrible week where they were really kind of competing for who got to be cared for. And so the one whose father was in open heart surgery is louder than the other one. So she was being more demanding. And then the other one, who is my client, was withdrawing and withdrawing. And then the other one became more demanding. So these habit formations were being enacted, where this one woman was feeling like, I'm in a terrible situation, and once again, I'm being abandoned. And this other person is feeling this habit formation of, people are just needing me all the time. I can't respond to everyone's needs. I need to get something too. Does that make sense to everybody, like, just as an emotional setup? I mean, I think everybody's experienced something along those lines, probably, when you're close and there are limited resources and it can get competitive in a close relationship.
And when you help those people, if today, without the Buddha's teachings, how would you treat them differently?
That's a really big and good question. It's kind of the difference between enacting the change interpersonally and putting the change into context dynamically in a bigger way. Okay, so let me break that down. In therapy, like, you can change the interpersonal things. So we talk about it. We talk about those feelings. We talk about different ways she could handle them. We talk about ways those feelings might occur in a session. We air out the feelings that have been repressed, which is probably 90% of it. And all these interpersonal things happen. So hopefully she goes back out into her world and she has all these different ideas about how she can handle it interpersonally. To me, the whole thing about Buddhism, like, therapy is great. I think it's a wonderful institution and has brought a great deal of suffering to an end. But there's a glass ceiling in therapy because it's not all interpersonal. And you go into therapy and you have a dedication to try to help this other person, to try to see their patterns, bring them to light, whatever tools you need, whether it's dreams, what happens in the session, what they report, you bring their habits to light and you send them out, hopefully with different habits. But if you don't really understand the base of those habits as a non-self dynamic, then you just get some better habits. You don't stop creating habits. Does that make sense?
So it's the root cause not taken care of. So they will just come back to be your client again and again.
That happens, yes. And even though people get so much better, I mean, I kind of, it's very hard to talk about this. I've been thinking about it a lot, Lisa, so thank you for asking, but it's hard to talk about it. And people can get a lot better, but I would put it more as the broader dynamic context than just the root cause. There's a great quote I love from a book called, I think, Emptiness of Emptiness, where they say, dualistic knowledge divides, non-dualistic knowledge contextualizes. So it's that contextualizing, I think, that really breaks it down. We're ultimately responsible for our own consciousness. So as much as I can help somebody, in the end, I have to send them out there, and they are responsible for their own consciousness. And I don't think they get that understanding entirely in psychotherapy. And so they can use my consciousness, they can borrow from me, they can learn from me, we can interact together, and they can improve a great deal. But until they really see that they are responsible for the consciousness stream that they find themselves in, and until they see that that consciousness stream is composed of 121 types of citta, for instance, then I think they have trouble really, really progressing. They get better, they live better, and that's worth a lot. But you know, I kind of think of this also as the stages of learning. That you know, I was in therapy for a million years myself before I found Buddhism, and I think that if I hadn't been, Buddhism would have been a much slower business. I forget, Kyle, I think you used that phrase, ripe. When I got to Buddhism, I was super ripe, because I've been doing all this therapy, and I had like, there's something more, there's something more. This is really working, but there is something more. And then boom, it blew open for me. So I'm not knocking psychotherapy. I think it's a great thing and really helps a lot of people. And I'm very, very thankful for it. But I think that you need to contextualize the issues, not just solve them. And that's what Buddhism gives us, a context that is unbounded. You know, there's kind of a bounding of the context in therapy.
Great, thank you.
Does that kind of address where you were interested?
Yes, to see the differences with or without Buddha's teachings.
Yeah, it is really interesting. I mean, I think that spending literally tens of thousands of hours listening to people's stories and their constructions of themselves and their experience has been the most beautiful, informative thing I could ask for. I'm so thankful to have done this and had this career. And I think that I bring in Buddhist teachings where appropriate now. I don't want to proselytize, and some people get turned off by it, but some people are very interested. So I'll bring in, well, the only way I can really help you with this is to use some Buddhist terminology, and I do. And so I feel like it's enriched my work clearly, and my own perspective coming to them is different, because it's not like you and I are going to solve this. It's more like, I'm going to try to help you go out and see this more. It's very interesting.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Are there any other questions? Bante wrote to us. Yes, he had texted me before he's driving, so we want him to be safe and not involved in class and driving at the same time. Yes. But I'm sure he'll bring in some commentary if he's been able to hear this discussion, I'm sure. From
one more thing. Because today you try to match up those 17 steps with the scientific terms. Is it possible you can match them in writing, so you can match one by one? I know you explained it today verbally.
Oh yeah, you want to just actually see it paired up. Sure. Sure.
Thank you.
It might take me a little bit to do. Yeah, I mean, I wrote about this whole sequence in the book, The Original Buddhist Psychology, but actually making a little chart pairing it up is a great idea.
Yeah, just the chart pairing it up. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great idea. You have some good, helpful ideas for helping me teach, so I appreciate that.
Thank you.
All of you do. Yeah. Is there anything else for
Dr.
tonight?
Jacobs, I did have a sort of just something that I think might be helpful for me and other people as we go forward in the next couple of weeks. Wondering about the best way to direct our learning about this same material. I was picturing that I could look at, like I know Bhikkhu Bodhi has a table 1.1, which is just a list of all the different types of cheetahs, and get an idea of those and sort of like understand the definitions instead of memorizing the cheetahs themselves. And then kind of know, I'm struggling with what else to do, I guess, to understand better.
No, that's a great question. Well, so I'll just say, I mean, next weekend is all study of mind, but as I was saying, it will be on a different scale. I'm going to rearrange the syllabus a smidge, so I will post that at some point too. But what to do in the meantime? That's a really good thing. I think I would pick whatever aspect of the teaching is resonating the most with you, and try to carry it around. And I think just we'll post some readings. I'll post some readings since I'm teaching in 2 weekends, that series. But I think the best way to work it is to pick an aspect of the dynamic phenomena that you can really kind of grasp, and then just try to carry that around and try to find it in experience. Oh, we've got a visitor. He's very cute. Yeah, try to find it in experience. Just stay open to the questions. So maybe if it's just something like watching reactivity to sensory experience, just try to like hold that for a while and just watch your reactivity. If it's that gateway to karma thing, karma, and you kind of, I mean, I think that's pretty relatable. Just watch the difference between the pure sensory experience and the things that you start to build on it. So try to, in your meditation too, that's the best place to do this, because you're not going to trip over the curb walking down the street with all this focus. In meditation, try to think of the flow of chitta. That's a really good thing to do. And you're watching breath, but you're also watching the flow of consciousness. And I think that a lot can be seen there, and the different kind of states that take us over can be more defined if we watch it in this dynamic way. Because, it's just like weather in there, that from sitting, and you can, what this study will do, I think, is lower your threshold of the observation. In the early psychological studies, there was a thing called JND, just noticeable difference. And they studied this in people. They would, touch them in 2 places and then move in a centimeter and, or millimeter, or whatever, move in just a little bit. I guess they were moving out actually, and until they could perceive that there were 2 touches. That's the just noticeable difference. Well, we're trying to basically shrink our just noticeable difference so that we notice things quicker. And this is an incredible tool of clarifying chitta and of improving life. When you just notice on a smaller scale, you just stop the proliferation. And I know that you've all, observed this in sitting and in mindfulness training, but Abhidhamma is a beautiful way to refine the scale of observing experience. So I think if you think in those terms, would that help, Jeff, or is that too abstract or vague?
No, I think that helps a lot. I think also maybe applying the information a little bit by observing the cheetahs might actually help me remember some of these things better as I'm trying to look at the definitions and say, oh, okay.
Absolutely. And that you're not going to be like, what's cheetah 67 right now? Tell me, you're not going to need to do that. But, noting the broad categories and where they point us and what they remind us to think about, like that kind of chart I did at the end of the 121, I think that's very helpful. They kind of, these minds, I think just inquiring about why things are set up the way they are in the Abhidhamma is better than memorizing the way it's set up. And, because it is set up so carefully. And, we're still, next weekend, we're going to plow through some lists, but the Chaitasikas are much more comprehensible. They're feelings and, mental states that we recognize. And the khandas, these are, now we're getting on the scale that our experience will plug into more easily. There's still going to be a lot of nitty gritty, but I don't think as much as this weekend. But I really think that the exposure is important, and I honestly, do apologize for any aspect of flooding or over information. But thanks, but I think you can just let it go now, and it will work its way through your cells. And you've done a lot of hard work to sit and absorb all of this. You really have. So is there anything else, or maybe we will take that same 20 minutes and just use them to go have 20 minutes worth of, oh, thank you, Kyle, and Lee, and all of you, thank you. I really do appreciate that. I don't usually start with 121 types, but I knew that you are serious students. I really appreciate it. And, just go out there and then get 20 minutes worth of the zillions of cheetahs that you will have, and be well. I really, really appreciate being with all of you so much. And we will be back in 2 weeks, and we're going to just continue with what the Abhidhamma teaches us about mind. And I'll bring in some Western psychology things that are parallels, like the neuropsych thing. Yeah.
Yeah, the assignment, because we only have 2 months and we need to have 2 assignments.
Bante and I texted, we'll get right on it, and we'll put it in Slack. We had a couple of ideas, but your idea is really good. So I'm kind of thinking we'll work that up as quickly as we can. So hopefully in the next few days, I have a bunch of stuff to put on Slack for you. But I appreciate it, your patience, because we should figure it out together, and we will.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anything else you all need? Do you all have my email? Yeah, it's on the Slack in there too. Feel free, if something just like starts bouncing around like pinball in your head and you want to talk about it, or if you just have questions or reactions or great dreams or anything, feel free to email me. I'll be happy to hear from you and write back. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Sadhu,
All right.
sadhu,
Thank you.
sadhu.
Thank you
Sadhu,
so
sadhu,
much.
sadhu.
It's been great, and I'll see you in 2 weeks. Stay healthy and well, everyone.
You too.
You too.
You as
Thank
well.
you.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thanks.